Hello, this is Ravi Chandra with the Pacific Heart Podcast, a special edition for the Center for Asian American Media and CanFest 2019, coming up May 9th through 19th of this year. I'm a psychiatrist in San Francisco and the author of Face Buddha, Transcendence in the Age of Social Networks, and a blogger for Psychology Today and the Center for Asian American Media. You can find out more about my writing and events at ravichandramd.com. I'm here today with Sally Wen Mao to discuss her recently released and highly praised second book of poetry, OCULUS, which especially drew my attention for CAM because it takes imaginative flight with the persona of groundbreaking Asian American actor May Wong and has many riffs on Asian and Asian American film and art throughout. I think it's really a must-read for anyone interested in the perspectives and lives of Asian and Asian American women, or Asian American film and culture more broadly, especially in this time when our identities are burning, as I wrote in a Psychology Today article. Oculus is a bright and guiding flame in that fire. So thank you. Welcome, Sally, and thank you so much for your work and for agreeing to this interview. And I just have to say, I've just been talking with friends all week about your book. And so I really appreciate it. It's really kind of lit up the proscenium of Asian American identity, particularly women's identity for me. And it's like almost a Copernican moment. As I talk with a good friend about how therapy is also related to poetry and bringing in associations and connections to broader meaning. So I think you're really lighting up that space in a very unique way for me. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So first, maybe you could tell me a little bit about your own narrative and identity as an immigrant, as an Asian American woman, and as a poet. How did you get here?
Oh, great. So I was born in Wuhan in China, and my parents immigrated to the States when I was 5. Actually, my dad did when I was 4, and then we joined him when I was 5. And then we spent about 4 years in Boston, and then we moved to the Bay Area. So we moved to Mountain View, California, when I was around 9. So I mostly grew up in the Bay Area, and I grew up really loving writing and art in general, like visual arts, writing, poetry, and also fiction. So I kind of just kept pursuing that throughout high school, and then later college, and then after college, I went to my MFA program at Cornell, and I wrote my first book of poetry there. And after that, I kind of moved around a lot. I've been doing a lot of residencies and fellowships as a writer. So that's been going on maybe since 2015. So in those years, I wrote my second book, and it just came out 2 months ago. So.
Okay. All right. Great. And congratulations again. I've been told that there are lit people, there are poetry people, there are visual art people, and there are film people, and never the worlds will meet.
Yeah.
But I think, as someone who kind of dabbles in all of those areas and certainly receives as a consumer all of those different worlds, I appreciated your crossing worlds in Oculus, which is chock full of cultural references. And I learned and felt so much about the arts through your work and about people. And so tell me, how do all those art forms kind of influence you as a person, from Pokemon to Wong Kar-wai? And how do they kind of relate for you? What do they supply for you?
Well, I've always consumed a lot of, visual media. I'm sure we all have, in one way or another. And what you said just now about, the film world, the art world, the literature world being kind of their own hermetically sealed spaces. I feel like that's getting challenged somewhat, right? I mean, I just came back from an artist residency where I lived with a bunch of other artists in a hotel in Shanghai, and so there were filmmakers, there were visual artists, and
There was a Swatch
yeah,
hotel.
it was, and I feel that different types of arts feed each other, and and I was really inspired by just being around other artists and seeing and witnessing their kind of artistic process. So yes, in Oculus, I look at a lot of not just other types of art, but also pop culture and media and the shows that we kind of consumed as kids and growing up. So I used I used my influences and tried to mesh them together with poetry.
Yeah. And what do you think the media and the arts have to offer Asian Americans in terms of identity and in this cultural moment?
So with Asian Americans in particular, I feel like the stereotype is that they are kind of, not very arts-oriented people in general, and I don't think that's true at all, just from my experience. And I think just the proliferation of Asian Americans across all arts, only in the past, let's say like 10 to 20 years, has really, I think, shifted, I guess, that stereotype, or I hope that is getting shifted. With poetry in particular, I think that I've seen such an emergence of younger Asian American poets. In the last 10 years, and it's been really exciting to see the diversity of voices within that very particular segment of the poetry world.
What do you think that's done for you as an artist expressing yourself, and what do you think it does to the broader Asian American community to have artists, more artists in our midst, or more visible artists in our midst?
I think it's great because, I mean, growing up, I barely had that many. I barely had any exposure to Asian Americans in terms of books, in terms of films, movies, music. If I wanted to consume work that is made by Asian or people who look like me, I had to turn to Asian film or Asian books in translation, right? So I think there's a big difference between the Asian American experience and the Asian experience. So I think that having a more expansive group of Asian American artists is going to change how young people grow up. They'll grow up thinking, I can also do that, right? Where I don't think that was necessarily obvious when I was growing up, and I grew up in the 90s, so that's not that long ago.
So offering more possibilities.
Yeah.
That's so true. Turning to kind of a writing motive, perhaps synchronistically, when I got your email agreeing for this interview, I was watching Elizabeth McCracken, the novelist, talk about the revenge motive for artists, for writers, to kind of say that I told you so, or see, I can do this, I'll show you. And to what extent is Oculus revenge?
Wow.
What are you taking aim at?
Wow, that's great. Actually never thought of it that way. I never thought of Oculus as revenge, but it's funny that you mentioned revenge because that has also been on my mind um, in terms of thinking about justice, right? And in terms of thinking about the ways in which a group of people have been oppressed for generations, and how do we approach justice without kind of veering into vengeance, right? I think that's a question that has preoccupied me, and I actually looked a lot to film when thinking about this question. I particularly East Asian films that featured East Asian women on some kind of like grand revenge quest, and I actually started an essay about it, but I haven't really finished it yet because I feel like it's a very complex subject. But the three films I used as references in my essay are Lady Vengeance, which is the most recent one, 2007, Chan Park-wook, the Korean director, and then Lady Snowblood, which is the Japanese film about like a woman who is out for vengeance, and I think it was the inspiration of Quentin Tarantino when he was doing Kill Bill. So originally that was like the Lady Snowblood was a Japanese woman who was out to get revenge, and then the last movie that I was looking at was Lady Whirlwind, which is a kung fu movie from the 70s, and it stars Angela Mao, this like the female Bruce Lee, essentially, and I was thinking a lot about the positionality of East Asian women in particular in the relationship with vengeance, and how often they are painted so in this like hyper feminine way, right? So hyper passive and kind of just like the China doll stereotype, right? And I was looking at this kind of other narrative where it kind of paints this East Asian woman as this this one note kind of I guess dragon lady, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you have you're out for vengeance, and there's no one stopping her. I am interested in kind of making that a little bit more complex, right? It's not just she's a dragon lady and you can't understand her impulses, or in Lady Vengeance, for example, you can completely understand why she wants vengeance, this is like, I'm rambling now, but...
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing which you talk about, or which you really delve into in your book, is seeing. So we'll talk about that a bit. But there are other synchronicities in addition to Elizabeth McCracken. I actually just did a write-up for the CamFest this year, which deals with surveillance in the Asian American community.
Yes.
So this idea of being watched and being seen and being perceived is really in the collective zeitgeist. And actually, last summer at the Guggenheim, I wrote a poem as well about seeing and being seen. So I think this is all kind of in the collective consciousness. We all kind of have that thing. How are we perceived?
Yeah.
And how we are perceived actually does have a big impact. But also kind of how do we see ourselves? So I think your book kind of addresses all of that. But maybe you can first tell me how you first conceived of this book and about the title, Oculus.
Yeah, so I was writing a lot of poems that had something to do with performance or technology, and I thought that, technology in a lot of ways, we use it as a performance, right? Social media, um, you know, pictures, photographs, like photography, cameras, video cameras, all of these things, which now, kind of pervade our everyday lives, are ways for us to perform, right? To perform an identity and to perform a self. And that tied into like literal performance, right? Like the literal performance of actors and actresses, and I had a poem, I had a poem sequence about May Wong, the actress, and
that you just started writing.
Yeah.
What inspired that first series of poems?
Well, yeah, I think I found a little, like I found something about her. I found May Wong at the Museum of the Chinese in America in New York, and I wanted to know more about her, so I just did a little bit more research, and there's lots of material out there about her life, and I just thought it was just so fascinating because there's literally no other figure that had her particular experience and her particular positionality as like this big Hollywood actress in the time of the roaring 20s and then the 30s and into the 40s. So I think I was just really inspired by reading her biography, and then I wanted to write persona poems, but I didn't necessarily want to just kind of recycle the biographical details that are out there. So I decided I wanted to kind of introduce a speculative element and have her go into the future. Yeah, because at this point we all know what has happened in her future and the present, our present, right? So, and those questions of representation still pervade our lives right now. So I thought that I thought that I wanted it to be a series almost as soon as I started writing the first poem.
Great. Maybe we can just go back a little step in to a non-poetry audience. What is a persona poem?
Oh, great, yeah. So a persona poem is a poem written in the perspective of somebody that you don't know, or it could be a historical figure like May Wong. It could be an animal. It could be
like in your first book. I guess.
Yeah. It could be any number of people that, or any number of subjects. And in a way, though, I think that it's just kind of harnessing what fiction writers have done forever, right? To use the first person, and that character being someone that is other, that is not, the poet speaker.
And how did you go about researching May Wong, and what films did you watch of hers?
I watched. I started by watching The Toll of the Sea because that one was so readily available on YouTube. And I've seen others like Shanghai Express. I tried to watch all the ones that are available on YouTube, like Limehouse Blues. I also saw there's one film I haven't seen that I really want to. It's Daughter of Shanghai, and it's not. I haven't found it online, but it's where she, I don't think she dies in that movie.
Okay.
So I did a lot of the research I did was reading her biographies, but also going into the archives and looking at newspaper clippings
at the
about
New York
her.
Public Library?
Yes, at the New York Public Library. So, and there's actually a lot of material out there about her, even if I think it's imperfect in some ways. But I'm still, I'm still collecting.
Uh-huh. Are there, well, I imagine there are, but were there ethical issues for you in writing from another person's perspective, May Wong or the other Asian American women that you explore?
I think there is always kind of a consideration with that, right? You always have to consider what's your responsibility when you're writing a persona poem, and for me, I went ahead and did it because as I was researching, I read a lot of her quotes. I read a lot of her, the things that she wrote herself, and I can not only just empathize with it. I've felt those things before. You know what I mean? Like,
give me an example of something that she wrote that resonated with you.
I mean, just being caught, like, as a Chinese American, having this homesickness for a place that you don't know, really, right? There are a lot of things she wrote about, very particular to her identity, and I share that identity with her. I was not born here, but growing up in America, growing up in California, I could really understand some of the things that she was struggling with, almost on a visceral level. So I don't believe that I'm exploiting her. I think that's where it gets tricky when you're writing from the perspective of somebody more disadvantaged or marginalized than you. That's when persona can get tricky. But in my case, I am writing from a perspective that is very, I think, similar to her in many ways. And also, white people have been writing from our perspective without any consideration of ethics for hundreds and hundreds of years. So,
writing our story in large part. Yeah.
Exactly. So I am going to rewrite it, from my perspective, because my perspective is closer to her perspective, right? I mean, one example is her biographer. He's this historian that I met actually at one of his talks, and I find that I don't necessarily think that he can understand her perspective on a visceral level. So
there was something he didn't get.
Yeah.
Can you talk? Maybe that would be. What do you think he didn't get, or what? And also, what are the kind of the themes that you resonated with May Wong? Just to spell that out a little bit.
Well, I mean, even in the beginning of his book, I just remember the first sentence said something like, "I first encountered the mystique of May Wong at this bookshop window in London." So instantly, like right from the beginning of that book. Yeah, exactly. Right. So if I were writing a biography of her, mystique is not necessarily a word that I would, use, because again, it's positionality, right? To a white man, maybe there's a mystique. Sure, maybe he's just like writing how he felt, but for me, it's like that's not mystical to me. That's literally my identity, right?
It's personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the themes of racism being misseen, being miscast. You talk about some of that, but not getting roles that she wanted, or as you mentioned last night, not ever being able to kiss the lead in her films, for example, always dying.
Yeah.
So it's tragic heroine. So that's all from her life and from her acting. But in A Brilliant Leap, you really embody Anna May Wong in your poems. And of course, not her actual life, as you said, but kind of the essence of her psyche and her striving, as she and her inner life might be or have been in various settings, using a time machine to make cameos in problematic films like Breakfast at Tiffany's, 16 Candles, Kill Bill, Romeo Must Die, and into the future where she's a heroine, breaking up the brawl and saving everyone, which I thought was a great line. Can you talk about making that imaginative leap, and how much is you versus your kind of imagining of Anna May Wong and her kind of embodying her in a certain way, and yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think with all persona poems, it's me. It's me, and it's her too, but it's mostly me. I think somebody said that in a workshop once when I was workshopping these poems. He said that this is Anna May Wong, but it's also Sally Wen Mao, the speaker, and I'm like, well, I can't deny that. So, a lot of it is getting to the essence of kind of an emotion, of feeling this non-belonging that is very pervasive and pervasive throughout one's life that you can't really escape from. So you have to find a way to make room for it in this strange way, this alienation.
It's a super powerful word for Asian Americans in particular, belonging.
Yeah, exactly. So, so the films are one way, like to kind of literalize that non-belonging, right? Like to not even be able to perform for a role that's meant to be of your skin, right? And that's some of the things that she had to face in her life. I think the first thing I found out about her was not what she was in, but what she was not in, right? So she was not in The Good Earth, which was one of the first films that depicted Chinese people in a positive light.
It was all yellow face.
Yeah. So I think she was being considered for the role, and they ended up turning her down for this other Eastern European actress and put her in yellowface. So, so there's something about that erasure that speaks to this deeper feeling of belonging, right? That casts that in a completely literal way.
Right. You don't even belong in this story, even though it's about your people.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and so tell me a little bit more about that. You said digging down into the essence, and so what was it like to dig down to that essence, and what did you discover, I guess, in that essence, and taking on the life force and the mask of Anna May Wong and other Asian and Asian American women?
It's just this feeling of, I think she is a very complicated and complex figure, right? I think she spoke very frankly about her frustrations, but at the same time, she was still this huge star. I think she was very lonely too. I mean, she never married, and she never had children. So I think that was something that she struggled with as well. And I think that's something that a lot of Asian Americans, particularly women, might struggle with too. It's that pressure to conform to this picture of perfection, and like, I think belonging also not only has to do with like this kind of collective belonging, but also in terms of like community and family, but also kind of personally, right? Like May Wong never. I think she struggled a lot with her personal life. She wanted, I think at some point she was saying that she wanted to marry a Chinese man, but they didn't like her because of her profession or because she was very, she had a very westernized kind of lifestyle, this kind of decadent flapper lifestyle, and she said that, Chinese men just want a wife who will, cook for them or whatever. But this is something that she said, and
Wow.
and I think that that's something that she had to struggle with, like the loneliness of her life. And I think that is not just particular to her. I think that's like a pervasive like feeling.
Right. Well, the book is not only about May Wong, but you kind of include really 2 centuries of Asian American women, starting with Fong Moy,
Yes.
who I didn't know about actually, and so I learned a lot from your book and your writing about her, and did a little bit of research online about her as well. So that was great. But starting with Fong Moy, and then May Wong, of course. There's another actress I didn't know about, Ruan Ling-yu,
Yes.
who I was just astounded to hear about her life and the end of her life, and she committed suicide. And there were other women as well, and so actually a couple of other women who committed suicide, Dol Kim, and the Instagrammer. I don't know her name, but I mean, I guess. And then you end your book with this, with the second to last poem about Solange, about a woman of color kind of being in the spotlight and really kind of taking on the center of attention, but watching her and I guess also wondering about the quality of being seen. So what do you think you kind of learned? And also the final poem in your book, which I thought was really wonderful, called Resurrection, about encountering May Wong's picture on subway posters.
Yes.
I guess this was the Museum of China, Chinese Americans exhibit that was being portrayed?
Well, actually, it was the New York Historical Society. That exhibition was about kind of Chinese Americans in general, but they used her face, in the advertisements.
Okay.
Yeah.
So encountering her face, had you already been doing research about her, or
definitely. So I knew her face very intimately at that point, but I think it was what spurred that poem was this feeling that, like she's a huge celebrity, like someone whose face I'm very familiar with, but all the other people who, frequent the subway, all the millions of people who pass by that picture might not recognize her.
Did they name her on the...
Well, that's the thing. I think they named her, but it was a very small. The writing was very small and like barely discernible. The only really big letters that you see is like Chinese American, exclusion and inclusion, right? So the only letters, the only words you see are Chinese American, and then you see her face. And that was really powerful for me because, like, I recognized her, but who else recognizes her? Unless you know her, unless you've researched her, or unless you are a film studies major. I don't know, but it's
communication.
Yeah. So it felt to me so strange, right? Because if you put a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio, everyone who walks in that subway station is going to recognize him, right? That's the nature of celebrity, right? But when you put her picture there, it's like this time capsule. Like maybe in the 1920s or 30s, people are going to recognize that. But like the unrecognition or the feeling that I got that like people didn't recognize her, that was what kind of spurred that moment.
That was a lovely line you had. You had this feeling that now you could never be a stranger here, as you write about. So that quality of belonging kind of came to life because she was there.
Yeah, I mean, because I could recognize her, even though maybe she can't recognize me, but there is a moment of recognition, right? And that is rare. That is rare, right? Like with Afa Moy, and all these other women that I wrote about, they like Afa Moy didn't have many archives. She contrasted May Wong in that, like, May Wong, I was able to find first person like accounts from May Wong, and direct quotes, things like that. So she was a celebrity. She had a public persona, and also, she was a great writer. But Afa Moy was all just
secondhand accounts.
Yeah, secondhand accounts, but particularly secondhand accounts from white people who were paying to see her, right? So I really wanted to write something from her perspective, which, I mean, I'm sure they looked just as absurd to her as she did to them, right? And also,
it comes out so beautifully in your poem.
Yeah, and I with the other figures, I think it's all kind of like in this atmosphere for me. It's like the psyche of the Asian American woman is not very. It's not very. I guess it's not very well known, right? Like I feel like I feel like that word again, to return to that word mystique, is kind of the default, right? Like, oh, it's mystical, it's inscrutable, we can never know, right? But the fact is, I think, like, Asian American women have very high rates of, like, depression,
suicide as well.
Yeah, and suicide. So, like, like this is it's something that's real, and I want to treat it that way, right?
Yeah, well, maybe actually we'll jump to that question. Is you talk a lot about distortion, I guess how do you notice distortion in your own life, and what role do you think that has in mental health?
Like distortion
of being seen.
Oh, yes.
Being perceived by others.
I mean, what happens is that you start to internalize it, right? That's what happens, and it's awful. It's so fucking bad, right? Like to be treated a certain way, like when you are seen as like a passive object, you will be treated a certain way, right? And to be treated that way, to be treated as disposable, what does that do to your sense of self-worth? What does that do to your, like, overall well-being, right? Like that story about the story Madame Butterfly, for example, that gets recycled over and over again into Miss Saigon, this like hit Broadway musical that just played in New York City in 2017. Like, that same story gets repeated and repeated and recycled. And the story is that this Asian woman gets pregnant by this white man, and then he goes back to his country, finds a white woman to marry and have children with, comes back, and then she sees that he has a family already, so there's no place for her, so she kills herself, right? So, like, what does that story, being like one of the most popular stories of all time, like, what does that say? Like, and being written by some white dude, like, and being
who can give you life and value.
Yeah, being written by a white dude, being enjoyed by mostly white audiences. What does that say to the the subject, the Asian American woman, like what does that say? Like, no, I'm basically, I'm worthless without recognition from white patriarchy, basically, right? So I just, oh man, I was, you just get tired at some point, and you realize you don't have to take that, you don't have to believe that, or you don't have to internalize it, right? But that's like such a long journey to realizing you don't have to internalize the awful things that are projected onto you, right?
Well, that's I think a perfect encapsulation of your some of your motive for writing this book. To go back to Elizabeth McCracken's question, what are you taking aim at? This patriarchy, and I love Jennifer Cheng's words last night when she said you were kind of creating a matrilineage, Asian American matrilineage.
Yes.
And so I love that. So just to switch topics a little bit, to talk about social media.
Yeah.
So I wrote a book about this, but I learned from you as well. I hadn't heard about the Instagrammer who committed suicide in Shanghai, and I didn't know Dao Kim's name, and social media had a lot to do with her life as well.
Yes.
And so what particular significance do you think social media has for Asian American women, and how do you relate to it?
Well, yeah, I think it's not just Asian American women. I feel like it just has such a huge influence. Actually, when I was I wrote the Dao Kim poem was kind of a very early poem, and I had been looking at her blog. I had been like going to her blog and reading her blog, and then suddenly she
sounds like a brilliant person.
Yeah, I mean, her blog was actually really beautiful and poetic. Like every post started with like, say hi to this, say hi to that. And it talked about like some of her struggles being a model, right? And then there's that kind of double layer of like you're performing yourself on a social media platform, but you're also performing on the runway. You're performing like you're wearing these clothes, right? For other people to kind of consume. And I think that's what like social media has become, right? Like you're kind of manipulating a self, and you're kind of packaging and performing a self onto these platforms like Instagram, and I think that in particular because of the dearth of Hollywood images or kind of mainstream media, I think a lot of Asian American women might turn to like social media, right? Or Asian Americans in general, I think have been more successful on platforms like YouTube. So that got me thinking a little bit more, and also about how performance, like you start to become your own kind of curator, right? Where maybe that power was not given to someone like Afon Moy, right? She had literally no power. She was like, people just paid to look at her, right? People paid to look at her, and she didn't really say much. She was never really quoted. And then like a century later, we have May Wong, where she did have some power over how her image, like the image that she projected. She could make certain choices and decisions that impacted how people perceived her. She could write, a column for a newspaper, and that, like, she had a little bit more agency there, but she ultimately couldn't control, the kinds of roles that she had to play until much later in her career when she was more established, right? So, but now, like, the next century, we have the 21st century, and now more Asian Americans are turning to social media to kind of curate a self. But then, at the same time, there's a limitation to that agency too, right? So you might you might have like an Instagram account and you might have followers, but you can never really know, you can never really know how you seem to other people, right? And that kind of, I think, anxiety is so pervasive. So pervasive, and it's so much a part of our psyches, and it drives a lot of like depressive thoughts, right?
Yeah. So in that sense, it's empowering, but there are dangers there. And how do you relate to social media?
Well,
I mean, I know you're on Twitter a lot. You see me there, and that's great. You have a great thread on May Wong.
Yeah, well, I do have social media accounts. I think there is this kind of desire to reach out to the world more, right? But I found that increasingly my social media accounts have more to do with my like poet self, which is I feel like it's like a very it's a different self maybe than like who I am. I'm not one of those people who will talk about really personal things on Twitter. But I know those people too, and I admire them, and I also think that Instagram can, like, I've had friends tell me that Instagram is so depressing because every time they scroll through their feeds, everybody's like getting married or on a vacation or, living some kind of glamorous life.
You're staring at a computer screen in your pajamas.
You're doing nothing.
Right.
Well, you can't pay your rent, that kind of thing. So I think it does, like, that like, feeling. It's not necessarily, like, FOMO, but that feeling of
social comparison.
The inadequacy, I think, flourishes on a platform like Instagram. So it's something I feel like how well can I fool them is the thing, right? Like how well can I fool them into believing that my life is XYZ, right? So
well, I think your poems, you're talking about social media being empowering, but I mean, it sounds like writing these poems yourself and expressing yourself was empowering to you.
Yeah, well, I don't know if social media is that empowering, but
expression.
But I do think that you have a little bit more agency in how you curate, right? Like you pick your angles, right? Not somebody else.
Right.
No, like you pick when you're going to post something, right? Well, with poetry, I think I've always written. I've always been writing, and I think it's almost like second nature to me at this point. I don't really, I feel like I've been writing poetry for much longer than, for example, like I've had, like, Instagram existed, right? So,
sure. Right.
So I think poetry is like a space for kind of like maybe a more authentic self. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think your poems felt very authentic to me, and certainly reading them felt enlarging and enriching and empowering to me as well. But now here you are. You're getting quite a good bit of attention for this wonderful book, well-deserved attention. So maybe what does it feel like to be in the oculus of the oculus poetica of the culture at this moment?
Well, I don't really, like I get a little bit more like Twitter mentions, like, Instagram mentions, which is great, but I don't think that, I don't think I'm famous or anything.
Okay.
Like I'm not. I'm really very grateful that people are paying attention to the book. That's something that I haven't quite experienced to this extent before. I like that other people are reading it and writing about it and paying such close attention to it, and I find that to be the biggest, like the biggest pleasure for me is just to see how people have read it and related to it. Just at City Lights yesterday, like young women are coming up to me and saying that, this is the book that they wish they wrote, or this is like they've never been able to relate to a poetry book so much, and that to me is like the most important thing. It's just to have that, to know that it's resonating, and allowing young people, young women to feel more connected to the world, and to realize that whatever they're feeling, it's not just them, it's pervasive, right? So,
and maybe they'll feel like they're not a stranger,
yeah,
because of your writing about these issues. So I think that's important. And I'd say there are many poetic moments, several poetic moments I can remember that people are moved to tears or really felt deeply changed by the experience. So I think your book certainly fit for me along in that continuum. So thank you so much. But I first read about your book because of Dan Chiason's review in the New Yorker.
Yes.
It was a really great review, and I learned so much from it. And I'm not here to chasten Chiason in any way. But he wonderfully focused on your poem's artistry and craft and some of the meanings. But in some key ways, that review, although it's probably the most prominent review of your book that I've seen, it kind of missed the whole point for me, too. I don't know if you kind of got that, too, because I don't know if it was conscious or unconscious or an editorial decision, but he never mentioned the words Asian or Asian American. Yeah, or the sense of female of color identity caught up by violent, imperialistic, patriarchal assumptions. He didn't really mention that at all, and that was basically mostly his review of Jenny Shu's book Eye Level last year as well. It was very about the craft and some of the meanings. So other reviewers, Rachel Carroll of the LA Review of Books really got those themes. Madeline Wattenberg of The Bind, several podcast interviewers really, by Asian American interviewers, really got those themes and honed in on what I thought was the core of the book, really. Were you, I don't know if you were at all perplexed by that choice or omission in the New Yorker, and perhaps it's, I don't know, maybe it's really dangerous of me to kind of ask for a specific kind of validation by the oculus of an institution like that. But should we be, calling that out? Or I don't know if did you notice that, or
I did notice. I mean, but I guess what I noticed in particular is that it seems like people got a lot of different, like a whole host of different things. Different readers got different things reading it, and I think that is pretty much like what the poet's experience is. I feel like in a way more so than maybe novelists, poets find that reactions and interpretations vary greatly, right? And I think they're like I definitely wanted this book to be a lot more political, politically driven, and obviously political, and I think that actually, like I mentioned before, like most of the reviews, like I found that most of them really got it right, and as for the omission, I don't fault the person for not including something. If it could have been a part of it, but who knows. I did really like his review. I thought that he got a lot of it correct, and maybe even by kind of omitting that he's really trying to get at the fact that this poetry collection would resonate with anybody who's on social media, right? And that to me is also important, right? It's not like I definitely wrote this book for Asian American women, but I also think a lot of those feelings and experiences, like most people have experienced, or most people have felt, right? Like that anxiety of social media, like that's not just
insecurity.
It's not just something that I experience as in this part of my identity, right? So I do want it to be kind of an oculus that looks up to like this larger the sky, right? Like the oculus is like something that you can see through, and it is a particular perspective, right? And it frames, the oculus is a window, so it frames this sky, but it's still, there's still a sky beyond it, right? So I guess that's how I see that.
Yeah, well, I think I really I appreciated that review as well, but I also wondered, was there why wouldn't the life and aspirations of Asian American identity, Asian American female identity, be interesting to a broad audience? I mean,
exactly.
Why not?
Why not? Yeah.
So it must have been an editorial decision, I assume, but I just wonder about that at some level.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with what you said. I mean, I guess I was thinking in terms of like that whole like malaise of the literary world, which is like relatability, right? It's like I think that often a lot of readers will say, "Oh, this book is so relatable," and then but then you're like, what do you mean relatable, right? Like what whose perspective? What about it is so
maybe that was relatable to people who generally have read New Yorker. In the past, but that's changing too. So what advice would you have for someone considering poetry now, to be a poet, an Asian American poet in 2019?
Advice, gosh. Sometimes I have a hard time with that because I feel like poetry is almost second nature. Again, like I think I said that before. But yeah, I think to harness your intuitive side is important when writing poetry, and to not to get too caught up in the optics, right? Not to get too caught up in the oculus, and also like how people see you, or like don't become too obsessed with that, because that is like a whole other side of poetry, like the business side. It's like, oh, like what prizes have I won, that kind of thing. Like just stick with this path that you've carved for yourself. Like I would just like the advice I would give is to kind of, I don't want to say like stay true, but something along those lines, right? Like just to keep experimenting and keep the wonder alive, and don't get too like jaded from the circus, the carnival. This kind of exists outside of you. I think that at the end of the day, poetry is supposed to come from this interior space that is sacred.
Well said. So I think you certainly touched that sacred space for all of us, for any reader. And as you know, the oculus is only a portal, and the eye is only a sense organ.
Yes.
But we really see with our visual cortex, and other neural structures that create and inform our vision. So just thank you again for reshaping our cultural cortex and maybe allowing us to see the sky beyond our narrow perceptions, and hopefully work like yours can help us see each other and ourselves more clearly with all our human potential and difficulty.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Best wishes.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. So thank you.